Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. After I prepared the program this week and I spoke about the window of opportunity which has opened up in order to annex the areas such as the Jordan Valley, I picked up the newspaper while preparing this introductory comment, and I saw an article which I share with you, which said the following: Ambassador to the United States Ron Dermer is lobbying Republican lawmakers and White House officials, arguing that Israel should act swiftly with the annexation of settlements in the West Bank. According to the report, Dermer said during his meetings in Washington, "We need to move ahead with annexation now because you don't know what could be the outcome of the presidential election in November." He reportedly said Joe Biden might win. There is a narrow window and we should act now. He did not respond to a request for a comment on this report. So an administration official told the Post, the Jerusalem Post, that Dermer expressed Israel's desire to move ahead with applying its sovereignty to the settlements. He said that it should be done, and the quicker the better. He did not necessarily mention any connection to the upcoming election. Now, during my program, I spoke about this window of opportunity, which is really once in a lifetime or once in a century. We have an opportunity now with the Trump administration enable Israel to apply sovereignty, and the possibility that the Trump administration might come to an end in November and the Democrats take over, who have already said they are opposed to Israel's sovereignty. So we're at a momentous and historical moment. And after I prepared the program, I found this in the paper, which pretty much corresponds with what I said. So stay listening, and you'll hear the details of my ideas along these lines. Thanks again for listening to Jay Shapiro here.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Biblical.
Be beautiful.
Wear your crown.
Wrapping is my crown.
Do what married Jewish women have been doing for thousands of years. Celebrate the art of head wrapping. I'm Andrea Grinberg from Rapunzel.com. We have beautiful scarves, stunning accessories, scarves for faith, scarves for healing, and scarves for fun. Rapunzel.com. That's Rapunzel with a W. Or click on our banner on the Israel News Talk Radio homepage.
Rapunzel.com. Beautiful scarves, stunning accessories paired with tutorials, support, and a vibrant community to give you everything you need to start and perfect your head covering journey.
Don't forget, join the Rapunzel community group on Facebook to see, learn, and share your beautiful wraps. That's Rapunzel with a W on Facebook.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
Get 10% off your purchase with promo code RADIO. Go now to Rapunzel.com.
You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. I want to start off this week with a quotation from Shakespeare from Julius Caesar, Act 4, Scene 3. The speaker is Brutus, and he said the following: "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood lead on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat." Unquote. There's going to be an election in the United States in November. How it's going to be done, we still don't know because of the virus. But we today are now on this tide, this full tide that Shakespeare referred to. Trump is ready to recognize Israeli sovereignty in the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley cannot be in the hands other than Israel because that is the defense we have, our protection from invasion from the east. If the Democrats win the election, we will not be able to apply sovereignty because the Democrats are committed to the non-existent two-state solution. Interestingly enough, the other Arab nations, the Sunni nations, are afraid of Iran, which is a Shiite nation, and they've warmed up to Israel over the last couple of years. Now, this moment between now and the American election is critical to the state of Israel and actually to the history of the Jewish people, because if we do not apply sovereignty now, then there's a good possibility that we will be unable to do so after the American elections. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about what's happened in the last year. In the last 500 days, Israel hasn't really had a government. But during that time, there still were people who were ministers, even only for a short period of time. What happened during that time? The defense ministry was in the hands of Bennett, and when he did things that hadn't been done before, he became the defense minister at a historic moment in November 2019 when the Trump administration publicly changed its policy toward the settlement enterprise, stating that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria were not inconsistent with international law. Netanyahu had already pledged to annex the West Bank settlements before Bennett became the defense minister. It was a move that was strengthened by the unveiling of Donald Trump's peace plan in January, which allowed for the application of Israeli sovereignty over 30% of the so-called West Bank. So therefore, Bennett, as defense minister, had a wider latitude for action than his predecessors did. He couldn't do anything with Gaza, which is in the hands of a terrorist organization, but in the biblical heartland, what they call the West Bank, he could do something. He created a team to prepare the defense ministry for the application of sovereignty. To top it all off, he gave the initial green light to one of the largest West Bank construction projects. It's called E2, that allocated 7,000 new homes in Efrat, which is just south of Jerusalem. Now, what about Jerusalem itself? How should we take advantage of this opportunity, this historic opportunity? Back in 2018, May, just 2 years ago, the 70th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel, the United States opened an embassy in Jerusalem. Earlier, in December 2017, President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He explained that Jerusalem always had been the historic capital of the Jewish people and had always been the seat of Israel's government. And what he said at the time, and I quote, "There's nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It's also the right thing to do." He refrained, however, from delineating the city's borders. Now, the critics were against these U.S. moves because they said they potentially destabilized the region. All the critics warned of an impending wave of Palestinian terrorism, of riots in the streets of the Arab world, and violence against U.S. embassies. Nothing of this sort happened. What did happen? The American decision inspired other nations to take steps to recognize Jerusalem and to plan on moving their embassies and to establish missions in the city of Jerusalem. Most Israelis were elated by the U.S. recognition of the Jewish people's ancient roots in Jerusalem. Keep in mind that King David made Jerusalem his capital 3,000 years ago. So to us, to the Israelis, this is an elementary historical justice, and Trump made a historic and courageous decision. Other presidents have promised since back in 1994, I think it was, when the American Congress passed a Jerusalem as a capital of Israel resolution. But all the presidents put it off until Trump. The so-called Trump Mideast peace plan, which he calls the deal of the century, has further fortified Israel's control over Jerusalem. This new plan affirms Israel's right to the entirety of undivided Jerusalem, recognize again that it is Israel's capital. The plan places the old city of Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty and gives Israel the task of safeguarding the holy sites and guaranteeing freedom of worship, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, which Israel has done so far since the Six-Day War. Moreover, the deal of the century allows for extending Israeli law to areas around Jerusalem and the so-called West Bank, such as Ma'ale Adumim, which is between Jerusalem and the Jordan Valley, and the corridor linking it to Jerusalem, which is called E1 corridor. This area is of paramount strategic importance since Israel intends to maintain the Jordan Valley as its eastern defensible border, which makes sense. Which means we have to secure the highway from the Mediterranean coast, where most Israelis live, across to the Jordan Valley, going through Jerusalem via Ma'ale Adumim. Jerusalem is the only juncture along the central mountains in the land of Israel, so it's the linchpin for maintaining a defensive line across to the Jordan Valley. First priority of this new Israeli government should be building in and around Jerusalem. Within the parameters of the Trump plan, the new Israeli government should seize the opportunity to strengthen its hold over the city. Doing so commands a huge supportive consensus in Israel. So, building between Jerusalem and the Jordan Valley, and building in the Jordan Valley and keeping it under Israel's sovereignty is important for the defense of Israel and for the growth of Israel. These people are now being piled up in the area of Tel Aviv when we have the rest of the country which is available for settlement. So right now, between now and the American election, is absolutely a momentous historical opportunity to extend sovereignty, particularly in the Jordan Valley, and to continue building in the Jerusalem area. And all this is beside the Negev, which is a story unto itself. But I'm talking about central Israel, the Jordan Valley, which we need for our growth and for protection against invasion from the east. So this is a very delicate situation. There's a new government in Israel. The question is, will they take this opportunity, which I said in the beginning is one of the affairs in the one of the tides in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, as Shakespeare said, the voyage their life is bound in shallows and miseries, and on such a full sea are we now afloat. This is absolutely a prediction by Brutus and Julius Caesar, describing the situation we are in right now, and we have to take advantage of it. There are no two ways about it. And if the present government does not do so, it'll be a blot on the memory, on the history of this government. I'll be back after the break.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. In the first part of this program, I said that Israel should take advantage of the period now between today and the next election in the United States, which is in November, to apply Israeli sovereignty, at least to the Jordan Valley. Now, you have to keep in mind, the Trump peace plan would allow Israel to annex 30% of the so-called West Bank, including all settlements and the entire Jordan Valley, while providing the Palestinians with a massive economic aid package to support their establishing a demilitarized state if they meet certain conditions, including stopping incitement and stopping payments to terrorists, and including civil rights for the Palestinians. So in a sense, the applying Israeli sovereignty to the Jordan Valley is almost a given. That's not a question. The United States would support Israeli annexation in the West Bank. By the way, I don't think annexation is the right word. I think a better word would be apply Israeli sovereignty. So as I started to say, we can tell from what's happening and what the people in the U.S. State Department are saying that the United States would support Israeli annexation in the West Bank, but only if such a step was executed within the context of the Trump peace plan. And a U.S. Jerusalem embassy spokesman said that specifically. And I quote, he said, "As we have made consistently clear, we are prepared to recognize Israeli actions to extend Israeli sovereignty and the application of Israeli law to areas of the West Bank that the Trump vision foresees as being part of the State of Israel." Now, in other words, the spokesman for the U.S. Embassy more or less separated the applying Israeli sovereignty to areas of the so-called West Bank, separated it from the creation of a Palestinian state. However, it linked what's happening to following the Trump peace plan. The Trump peace plan details a 4-year process toward the creation of a demilitarized Palestinian state on about 70% of the so-called West Bank. So, what's supposed to happen? Israel is expected to engage in talks with the Palestinians toward the creation of this Palestinian state, should the Palestinians agree to hold such negotiations, which so far they have not agreed to. But if you understand what the American spokesman is saying, annexation is not contingent upon Palestinian agreement to the talks. Now, our Prime Minister has already spoken of his approval of the Trump peace plan. The U.S. position that Israel's sovereignty can be applied to the West Bank settlements is only within the context of the plan, and that's been consistent since President Donald Trump first unveiled the plan. So there are those in Israel, including the settler leadership, who are trying to separate the idea of annexation from the plan. And the truth of the matter is, the American Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was in Israel last week, and he sort of confused the issue when he told reporters that annexation was an Israeli decision. So this statement appeared to some people to separate the Trump peace plan from sovereignty over Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. A week ago, a U.S. embassy spokesman in Jerusalem clarified that the American stance on the matter has been consistent since January and should be viewed as follows, and I quote, "Our position has not changed. We continue to pursue the path that the President set out in January when he presented the American vision for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. In exchange for the United States recognizing Israel's sovereignty over areas the vision earmarks as part of Israel, Israel has agreed to freeze all settlement activity for the next 4 years in areas that the Trump vision earmarked for a future Palestinian state, and Israel should negotiate with the Palestinians in good faith on the basis of the Trump vision." Now, according to the Trump vision, according to the spokesman of the U.S. Embassy, this will give the Palestinians an opportunity to come to the table and negotiate a peace agreement that will result in the establishment of a state of their own. The United States stands ready and willing to offer wide-ranging assistance to facilitate a final peace agreement. Now, what's happening, by the way, at the moment is that a team of Israelis and Americans are working to create a map of the territory in what's called Area C. over which Israeli sovereignty can be applied. And they're still doing this, apparently. So, and Netanyahu's agreement with the coalition, with blue and white, allows for the application of sovereignty as early as July 1st, just a couple months from now. So you have an interesting, I guess you can call it a paradox. The Trump plan calls for Israel's sovereignty over areas of the so-called West Bank that we call Judea and Samaria, and also asks or tells Israel not to do any settling in that area which is earmarked for a Palestinian state. The problem is that the Palestinians refuse to come and negotiate. So if this continues for another 4 years, that is, the Palestinians refuse to come to the table, what is supposed to happen at the end of the 4 years? Does the Palestinian Authority drop out of the picture and then Israel can do what it wants? I find this hard to believe, but we don't know. We're sort of in a no-no land at the moment. And by the way, the ambassadors to Israel of 11 European countries and the European Union registered a protest with the Israeli Foreign Ministry about the possibility of Israel annexing 30% of the West Bank. Now, keep in mind that annexing, or if you will, promoting or putting sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty, over 30% of that area, including the Jordan Valley, is part of the Trump plan. So I'm not quite sure why these European nations are taking issue. By the way, these countries, interesting to know who they are, by the way, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Ireland, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Sweden, Belgium, and Denmark, and Finland, and the European Union itself. So they're concerned, apparently, of the part of the coalition agreement between the Likud and the Blue and White Party that allowed the Prime Minister, in this case Netanyahu, to hold the vote in the cabinet or the Knesset as early as July 1st on applying Israeli sovereignty to parts of the West Bank. According to them, which I think they're wrong, by the way, annexation violates international law, harms chances for peace, or hurt Israel's international standing. Interesting, by the way, you have to go all the way back to 1920 and the partition plan. For all practical purposes, if you check the history, nothing has really replaced the partition plan. Other things were tried. To split the land between the UN resolution of 1947 that there should be an Arab state and a Jewish state. All these things don't apply at all because the Arabs violated it with violence. So the real bottom line, that declaration or that document that defines what should go on goes all the way back to the League of Nations in 1920. That this land, the whole land, should be eventually become a Jewish state. Trouble is that everybody looks at things that have happened since then, and they don't seem to know their history very well, or they turn a blind eye to the history. So now we have the Trump plan, and again, the bottom line with the Trump plan, that Israel can certainly, no matter what else, Israel can apply sovereignty to 30% of Judea and Samaria, including the Jordan Valley, which is necessary for Israel's defense. So that's the situation right now. I think it's a little bit confusing, but I think we're still in that area, the window of opportunity to apply Israeli sovereignty to at least the 30%. I'll be back after the break.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. I said previously that Israel has a right to annex the Jordan Valley. Now, this is in keeping in agreement with a UN resolution. According to the UN resolution, indigenous peoples have the right to the lands and territories and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. This is Article 26.1 of a UN resolution, a UN declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. It's known by its abbreviation, UNDRIP. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly on September 13th, 2007. It was adopted with 144 states in favor, only 4 against, and 11 abstentions. Now, this UN resolution recognized that indigenous people, who are also known as First People, Aboriginal people, or Native people, have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired, and that the exercise of these rights shall be free from discrimination of any kind. Now, with domestic state practice, the legal status and rights of indigenous peoples have evolved and crystallized into international customary law. The UN affirmed that lands, rights of indigenous people are protected and that these rights are general principles of law. Among others, Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, Israel, and Luxembourg voted in favor of the declaration. Since 2007, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, who voted against originally, formally endorsed this declaration in 2010. In their relations with Israel, none of these countries can claim that the declaration does not apply to Israeli Jews, since such position would amount to blatant racial discrimination. In other words, the Jews, are the native people of Israel, of Eretz Israel. According to international law, the Jews are the indigenous people of the lands referred to as Judea, Samaria, Palestine, Israel, and the Holy Land, and therefore fulfill the criteria required by international law. The Jews are the ethnic group that was the original settler of Judea and Samaria 3,500 years ago, when the land was bestowed upon the Jews by God. Leaders of this world, who chose to make abstractions of history, misleadingly referred to Judea and Samaria as the West Bank of the Jordan River, which includes Israel. After the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the Treaty of Lausanne 1923, the British Mandate for Palestine 1922, the San Remo Resolution 1920, and the Treaty of Sèvres 1920 created international law and recognized and reestablished the historical indigenous rights of the Jews to their land. The signatories of those treaties and the mandate, Britain, France, Turkey, Japan, Italy, and so forth, are bound by them. With the mandate accorded to Great Britain in August 1922, the League of Nations recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. Unquote. The Jewish people's right to settle in the land of Palestine, their historic homeland, and to establish their state there is thus a legal right anchored in international law. This UN resolution reaffirms the right of the Jewish people as the indigenous people, and especially their rights to their lands, territories, and resources. UN Security Council resolutions stating that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are illegal are not binding at all. Only resolutions taken under Chapter 7 of UN Charter are binding on all UN member states. For example, Security Council Resolution 2334 was adopted on December 26, 2016 by a 14-0 vote. 4 permanent members of the Security Council, China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, voted in favor. The United States abstained. This resolution was not adopted under Chapter 7 of the Charter. It is not binding. That resolution states that Israel's settlement activity constitutes a flagrant violation of international law. That resolution has no legal validity. This resolution violates the UNDRIP, the British Mandate, and other treaties. The right of the Jewish people to settle in the so-called West Bank and Israel's right to annex parts of Judea and Samaria derived from the mandate. Pursuant to the mandate, the right to annex some parts of Judea and Samaria is a direct consequence of the right of the Jews to settle in all of Palestine. That is the territory of the 1936 mandate. Article 80 of the United States Charter, back in 1945, recognized the validity of existing rights that states and people acquired under the various mandates under the League of Nations, including the British Mandate for Palestine, which goes back to 1922, and the rights of Jews to settle in the land, that is Judea and Samaria, by virtue of all these instruments. This has been confirmed by all kinds of experts, particularly Eugene Rostow. These rights cannot be altered by the UN. In a series of decisions and advisory opinions on Namibia, the International Court of Justice ruled that a League mandate for the League of Nations is a binding international instrument like a treaty, which continues as an obligation of the international community until its terms are fulfilled. In other words, the mandate was given to Britain under the League of Nations to establish a homeland for the Jewish people. That survived the League of Nations and became part of the rule of law under the United Nations. Like the Southwest African Mandate, The Palestine Mandate survived the termination of the British administration as a trust under Article 80 of the UN Charter. Jewish rights, therefore, of settlement in the so-called West Bank exist. It cannot seriously be contended since the European Union, France, Britain, Russia, China, and other states contend that the Jewish communities in the West Bank are illegal and that annexation is contrary to international law. This is simply wrong. This position is a political position, not a legal position, and there's a big difference. Despite UN resolutions to the contrary, the establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the so-called West Bank is not inconsistent with international law. Israel, the Jewish state, as a member of the international community, has the right, but also the duty, to fulfill the mandate that most nations disregarded. So we have every right. 103 years have passed since the Balfour Declaration, 73 years since the 1947 resolution, 52 years since the Six-Day War, 27 years since the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995 were signed but not lead to any kind of peace. The Palestinian Authority does not want peace. They refused Israel's offers made in 2000 and 2008 to allow for the development of a Palestinian state and live in peace, but they refused these things. These are the hard facts on the ground. And therefore, as I said previously, we are now in that opening before the election in the United States for Israel to annex at least the Jordan Valley, if not more. Israel has a duty to draw the logical consequences of what's happening. I'll be back next time.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.